everybody, and welcome to the special edition of the Social Wave Project podcast. My name is Sarah Francis, but everyone calls me Says. And although this podcast was interviewed back in October, I decided to do something very special because in December I announced on my YouTube channel that I am doing a documentary called Titanic, Titans of the Sea, and I did explain a little bit, but since it's my first podcast episode since December, which we are now on to April, I thought I would give you a little sneak peek to talk about the Titanic in the lead up to the documentary. And what person to ask to bring onto the podcast is Sam. So, Sam, hello, welcome to the
Hello.
podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think, to be honest, though, it's I know that what time is it where you are? Because you're over across the pond.
Yeah, 8:40 in the morning.
Oh, 8:40. Oh,
It's
so it's
8:40
still
here.
pretty early.
Oh yeah. I usually, like I said earlier, I usually wake up between like around the 9-ish area. So I had to get up early for this, but I'm like, okay, wake up, wake up, wake up. I got my mocha. So anybody who knows me knows I like mocha. So I've got that ready. I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
Brilliant. And Sam, I know that you have a YouTube channel called Historic Travels, but can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and what are your hobbies and interests and your connection with the Titanic?
Yeah, so basically I run Historic Travels and it's a maritime history channel, but I do focus on the Titanic a lot because the Titanic is what got me interested in maritime history, you know? And I'm sorry, what was the question? So what were my
Oh,
hobbies and
oh, it's
everything?
okay. It's talk about what's your connection and
Oh,
when did your interest began?
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry. But
it's okay.
it's still early here. But my connection to the Titanic, it started off when I was a kid. I was around 6 or 7 when the James Cameron movie came out. And that whole thing just kind of blew me away. It was just like, what do you mean? Like I asked my grandpa who was watching the movie, I'm like, what's going on? Like, what's happening here? Because it was the scene in the movie where Lightoller told Captain Smith, should we put the women and children into the boat, sir? And it was that I even remember that. I mean, I was 6 or 7 years old and I'm 30 now and I still remember that. It's so clear. And
Oh,
it's funny what you remember when you're from your when you were little. You know what I mean?
oh no, definitely, because I know that I didn't really see the Titanic until much older. I was only three. I'm almost 28 now, but I was about three. But then I remember when my nan was still around, she used to have a copy of the VHS into
Uh,
two parts, which was still a bit annoying to me at the time. Like, really, do I have to change to the video cassette again? But it was really good though. But I did have a bit of a crush on Leonardo DiCaprio. I thought
uh,
he was quite nice, quite good looking at the
gotcha,
time.
gotcha. Oh yeah. Hey, I'm not gonna lie. I had a little crush on Kate Winslet. You know. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, I thought she was cute. I thought she was cute.
oh no, she is still cute, but she is still talented as well. But I actually came across her once.
Oh, really? You met her?
Well, didn't actually met her, but I actually saw her with her family at Edinburgh Airport one time.
Is she from the UK? I forgot. Is she from the UK?
Yeah, I believe she is from Surrey, I think. I could be wrong, but that's what I tend to believe her where she is.
I gotcha. I gotcha. That's really cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, then my interest went from the movie, and then I started studying the real ship, and I was very rambunctious as a child, and then when my mind got fixated on something, it's like that was all I thought about, and I'm sure I drove my parents crazy with it. And my great grandmother was born in 1909, and I remember that we were going to go see her, and I was probably 8 or 9, maybe 10. And I remember asking my mom, she was alive when the Titanic sank. Can I ask her about it? My mom's like, Sam, don't you bug her about that. She was 3 years old. She doesn't remember. It's like she wasn't. She's like, don't you start bugging her. I'm like, okay.
Oh no, it's just like one of those things really with the different age gaps really. And I always find it so fascinating to learn about different people's lives as well. But of course really none of the survivors are no longer alive now. But for the 110th anniversary, the Titanic can mean so much to so many people, especially there is a huge community group on Discord as well.
Oh,
And
really?
Yeah,
There's
it
a
is
lot.
so huge. Well, oh no, not Discord, beg your pardon. Reddit, and
Oh, Reddit.
yeah, Reddit. It's like a huge community where they submit drawings, and then there's some theories as well. And there's some that really inspired me to actually put some of the questions into this video because even though you have your own opinions on your YouTube channel, Sam, I thought I might give you a little bit of a trick just test your
Okay.
Titanic memory.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
So I know with like we put down the first questions about like the Titanic connection, so that was okay. So we are going to be focusing on the different things about the Titanic sinking and also with the wreck as well, because there are some things that people don't really know about too much. And there was some things that I really did find out through newspaper articles and, of course, Reddit. But knowing that you are very passionate about maritime laws, because you did a previous video on the Costa Concordia, I understand from last year.
Okay. Captain Scatino and all that fun stuff. Yes.
Oh yeah, so because I know you had a really strong like opinion on the captain of the Concosta Cordia, and also I would recommend watching the video. By the way, it's super interesting, but I probably might use that to test your knowledge. So everyone knows the story of the Titanic and when it was built in Belfast to when it got hit by the iceberg and all the superstitions for years before. So most people do know that, but I'm really interested and keen to know about what happened, what really happened, because there are some mythical mysteries, clues, and possibly even loads of arguments to this, which still continues. And this is a thing that I thought I would start with the sinking itself, because I learnt that in the maritime laws at the time, I discovered that there were smaller liners. So I'm going to use the Californian, for example, because that is the biggest one. And at the time, when you think about the smaller liners and the maritime laws up to 1912, the shift times and the patterns were very different because even though if you have one operator at the time or maybe some smaller liners don't usually have shifts at all, so they can stay up as long as they like and then shut down to go to bed like any person would when you have to get up in the morning to go to work and
Right.
all of that. But this is like the thing because the Californian always gets criticized for the role of the Titanic disaster. But I really want to know if you think, Sam, is there anyone to blame through this? And this is going to be the next jump to the other question about the people who were involved. But what do you think about on this before we jump onto the people? Who do you think is really to blame?
No one. I think the Titanic disaster was a combination of a lot of things that went wrong all at the wrong time to make the perfect disaster because there was just everything that went wrong with the Titanic disaster. It I don't really see how anybody can be blamed for it, because it was just a freak thing. So take the Californian, for example. I think the only thing that they were guilty of was not doing enough. Now, because there is some debate among, like, if you believe the Californian was at the position that it was too far away from Titanic and they couldn't have seen it. But then you also find out that the Titanic was 13 miles not off course. So when Boxhall figured out the Titanic's position, that was 13 miles off, than where the ship actually was. So, but that's because he was in a hurry. It's not like in 1912 they had GPS and go, oh, we're right here, send it. It's like they had a weird formula and all this other stuff they had to do to figure out their position. So he was in a rush, given everything that was going on. I understand it. And the thing about the Californian, if they didn't know what they were seeing, you know what I mean? And are you familiar with the Mirage effect? Do you know about that?
Yes, there was a theory on this with the Mirage, and I know you mentioned it on your channel, Sam, but there was a theory of the different Mirages that happened because it's not like you see a Mirage in the desert, but you can see one that involves the reflection of the light of the moon and also with the sea because you have to remember when the Titanic sank. it was a moonless night, and the stars, you could see the stars from above, and it was very cold. But most historians and people tend to forget the mirages on the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, yeah, and it was a cold water mirage. So all day Sunday, the passengers thought it was pleasant out. Like they were outside having fun and everything. And then around 4 or 5 in the evening, ship's time, they noticed it got really cold. Like the temperature just plummeted. And that was because the Titanic left the warm waters of the Gulf Stream and sailed into the Labrador Current. And that's what brings the icebergs down from the north, is that current. So when they did that, it created a difference in temperature because you've got air around the ship that's warmer than the ground beneath it or the water. So that created a mirage effect. Now, with the right lighting conditions, it's easy to see because there's weird atmosphere distortions. I talk with my hands sometimes, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. I do that all the
Yeah,
time, so I completely understand.
right. And because there was no moon or anything, do you know the term false horizon? Have you heard that term?
Yes, I have heard it somewhere before, and I don't know who mentioned it, but I think there was one historian that mentioned it, or the artist Ken Marshall, but I have heard it somewhere from before.
Yeah, it's like when you're on a deck, you're looking ahead, you think you're seeing the horizon, but the real horizon is beneath it and everything's invisible underneath the horizon you're seeing. So the horizon you're seeing, the mirage effect is bending light particles. So you're seeing further ahead than what you really could be able to see under normal circumstances. And right in front of you is invisible. It's very weird, but that's basically what happened. Now, with the moon or something, you can see it. You can see the weird atmospheric effects. But on the night of the Titanic, as you said, there was no moon. The officers did note that there's a weird haze, but it didn't look like it was interfering with their visibility. From their perspective, it looked like everything was clear. And so jumping to the Californian, well, that's why the Titanic hit the iceberg, or one reason they didn't see it. Now with the Californian, they were just confused because like they tried to signal the Titanic with the Morse lamp, and then the Titanic thought they saw dots and dashes of Morse code with the Morse lamp, but they weren't really sure because the mirage effect was distorting the light. You see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah. And then on the Titanic's end, like they were shooting off rockets, but they weren't shooting off rockets based on the 1912 maritime law regulations, because rockets can also mean company signals. In 1912, for a rocket to mean distress, fire them off in 1 minute intervals. Titanic was doing it around every 5 minutes, which I have no idea why. Yeah, and then so on the Californian, you see a ship, it's stopped, you're in an ice field, and you see it acting weird. you know, go wake up the wireless guy. You know what I mean? Like Stanley Lord, get up, go up on deck, and just because there was enough odd stuff about this ship that they were seeing, go wake up the wireless guy, go see what's going on. You see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah,
That's it.
definitely. And then
Yeah.
this is where I'm going to have to jump in because everyone knows that Captain Stanley Lord, the press actually vilified him for the story, but there was one other person I found out that the press didn't really find out, but if they did, they would have blamed someone, and that was the California's wireless operator called Cyril Evans. Now, I've heard of his name somewhere before, but he wasn't mentioned a lot in the history books or the newspapers at the time. And from what you said about waking the wireless operator up while the Titanic was sinking and firing distress rockets, it's really interesting to see that at the time, the captain was more focused than the wireless operator, especially if he made contact with two of the Titanic's wireless operators, not Jack, I beg your pardon, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride. And they had a bit of the conflict to each other when John told Cyril to shut up, I'm working Cape Race,
Right.
when he was trying to send the passenger message signals before the Titanic hit the iceberg. It's really interesting because when you think of that, if they had a short ding dong over the wireless, so in other words, they were angry with each other, but it was only a short argument. It's interesting to think Cyril Evans wasn't really the main focus of it.
Well, the whole thing about the keep out, shut up, I'm working Cape Race. What you have to remember, and Jack Thayer, or Jack Phillips, Jack Thayer, Jack Phillips. I did the same thing as you. Yeah. Yeah. You know that it's easy to get these names mixed up sometimes. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, do you know, like, you have to remember at that time, he had been awake around 18 hours. He did not sleep at all the night before because him and Harold Bride, the radio broke, the Marconi burned out. So him and Harold Bride spent all night fixing the radio when they shouldn't have done that. You know, according to the Marconi manual, if your radio breaks, switch over to the emergency set. Do not try to fix the main set. But they broke the rules, they fixed it, and if they would have been using the emergency set, the Carpathia may have not heard the Titanic's distress call. So the thing about Jack Phillips is that he's talking to Cape Race, okay, very far away. He's got the radio turned up so he can hear the faint dots and dashes because, you know, the further away a location was, the louder you have to have your radio. And then all of a sudden, the Californian chimes in and he gets a loud ring in his ears. He's very sleepy. You know what I mean?
Oh
It
yeah.
was anybody would be agitated at that point. So I mean, it was so loud it caused him to rip his headset off and then start angrily. I mean, it wasn't him being like. A lot of people like to blame him and say that he did that because the Titanic was unsinkable and no iceberg could sink it. But no, it had nothing like that. It was just he was angry and he vented. You know, anybody would do that under normal circumstances. You know what I mean? It wasn't right, but I understand why it happened. You see what I'm
Oh
saying?
yeah. He's just when he's like you're having a really bad day and you're waking up just in the middle of the night when someone's disturbing you. If someone texts you in the middle of the night on your mobile phone, I'm just like, ugh,
Yeah, what
really? So that's just like how I see it in my mind. But then jumping from that, because when you got to remember the Titanic sinking, it's hotly debated, which is still is 110 years later.
oh
And
yeah.
the thing that I really caught my attention since that there was a sketch, and this is something that's it's very rare to find on Google. There was a sketch by a sailor called Lewis P. Skidmore, and I think I got his name right, and he drew the sketching of the Titanic through the eyes of Jack Thayer Jr. or John Thayer Jr. Through the testimony of the sinking of the Titanic. And
The V break drawing.
yeah, that's it. That's the one.
Yeah.
And he described of how the ship actually split in two, and it was really interesting that both the stern and the port, not the stern, the
The
bow,
bow. The bow.
they
We're up,
split up just like a banana kind of shape. And
we're up out of the water. Yeah, we're up out of the water. Yeah, in the drawing.
yeah, and there was a theory on Reddit that it was the case, but it was described
Aaron
by another
19.
survivor, which I couldn't
Aaron,
think of it as well. And I think, oh, who was the guy? James Cameron actually mentioned it as well with the banana theory in one of the Titanic documentaries. Yeah, the truth of the sinking at the time, because everyone believed before the wreck's discovery, it sank like a hole
it
into the
didn't
bottom of
split.
the
It
sea.
didn't split. Yeah.
It was likely it was either sugar coated by the juries at the time, or since the newspapers were rushed, because there was a theory, no, not a theory, there was newspapers wanted to rush things to get the story published. They want to be the first to publish the story. I always wondered if it was a subject of yellow journalism at the time.
Well, okay. So the whole thing about wow, nice term, yellow journalism. You don't hear that much. You don't hear that term much. But if as far as the whole V break thing, that was Jack Thayer later testified that the ship did not break in that manner. He said it did not do a V break. It was just how he was describing that the ship broke in two. That was it. It wasn't like and that's just how the guy who drew it. And then I don't know if you're familiar with this, but some conspiracy theorists like to go out and say the ship V broke, which really does not make sense at all when you think about physics. You know, the only way a ship can V break is if the bow and stern are still full of air. You know what I mean? Like the hood. You know, when the Bismarck hit the hood, it kind of did a V break because it exploded in the middle, and the bow and the stern still had air in it. So the V break theory really doesn't hold any. It doesn't make sense because the bow was completely flooded. And if you want more proof about that, look at the bow and look at the stern. The bow is in much better shape on the seafloor today than the stern because it looks like the stern imploded because it was still full of air. And the bow doesn't. Pressure doesn't affect something if it's all full of water.
Mm.
And the whole thing about the like people saying the ship sank in one piece, it seems like the inquiry went with the testimony of a couple of key people who said the ship sunk intact. More specifically, it was Lightoller and Archibald Gracie. But everybody who you have to remember, where were they on the ship at the time? Because it's no one really had a reason to lie. You know what I mean? It's not like you're trying to cover up something. You're just saying what you saw. And at the time of the breakup, Lightoller was fighting for his life, trying to get away from the ship, and that air vent was sucking him down, and he got blasted away from that. And Archibald Gracie was fighting the Grand Staircase Dome imploding. People think he was above the Grand Staircase Dome when it. So, I mean, both of these people just weren't in positions to see what the stern was doing. But if you go back and you look at the testimony, a lot of people said it broke. It broke. But it's like they just didn't go with that testimony. And there could have been some cover up a little bit because, if you think about the White Star Line and Harland and Wolff and all that, if you say a ship broke, that could bring into question the safety of your ships, and the structural integrity. Because are you familiar with the expansion joints?
No.
So expansion joints are essentially part of the hull and are part of the superstructure, and it's designed to allow the superstructure to kind of flex, with the ocean a little bit and keep the ship from breaking up. Basically, that's a simplified version. And they changed the expansion joint design between Titanic and Britannic. So it looks like they may have been somewhat suspicious of that. And Lightoller said that when the ship's final plunge began, he noticed that the front expansion joint was open on the Titanic. He saw it open, like there was a space there. And if you look at the wreck, the expansion joint's open. You can see it on the deck.
Hmm.
So it's like they may have been suspicious of that, but then at the same time, I don't really think that played a factor in the breakup. But if we go into that, that's a whole other discussion. So
Yeah.
it's just there's a lot of things. I don't know if there would be exactly a cover up, but it's like they went with the testimony of a few people and not others. That's what it looks like to me.
Oh yeah, definitely. I absolutely 100% agree. And then we're moving on from the theories and all of that because whatever you judge really, because if you are a listener or if you watch like the whole episode on YouTube, we'll leave you to decide what you really think on this because you guys have an opinion on this too, and whatever opinion you have, it's always going to be something really interesting. So whether it's the breakup or who actually witnessed the ship breaking in two or sinking. But we're going to move on from the sinking to the wreck itself because this is something that I found really interesting the other day, and it's how can I put this? It's something like I don't know what you fully describe it, but there have been some events that haven't really been known about where I am. But I think from where you are, Sam, it could be the case because the wreck itself, since its discovery, it's in a way of not it's not going to be there for very long because it is degrading from all the bacteria in the ocean. But there is going to be some debates about whether the wreck should be left in peace or maybe it should be disturbed because people want to see the wreck historically rather than go for scientific research, which I don't know about you, but it makes me feel a bit cross, really, especially if there are relatives of the survivors who want people to leave the wreck alone. And it's especially the case, really, because I heard that in 2019, the Titanic wreck had a collision with a submarine. Well, actually, the submarine had a
With the
collision with the
Titanic, yes,
Titanic.
yes, I'm
And
familiar with it.
oh, did you not hear about that before?
No, 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 I knew about it. I'm familiar with it. Yeah, I heard about it when it happened.
Yeah, like it was really shocking, really, and but when you think about it, when like submarines or ships actually collide with the Titanic and things have disappeared, such as the crow's nest, for example, but I don't know
Right.
if it had something to do with that submarine or something else. But when you think about the scientific research about the wreck, Do you really think like the research could be right that about the Titanic disappearing in less than a century or probably less than 10 years or 5 years depending on how like the bacteria that's rusting away the wreck or what's your opinion on this, Sam?
Like, so are you're talking about the scientific side and like the wreck deterioration? Are you also asking me about like my opinion on people diving the wreck? Should it be left alone? Is that also what you're asking?
Oh yeah, anything
Yeah, yeah.
really.
Okay. So here's the ultimate thing, and I've talked about this on my YouTube channel before. I think I have a video, the ethics of like Titanic artifact recovery and stuff like that. I've talked about it, and I've always liked the original stance on it, where they don't mind exploring the Titanic, but they don't take any items from within the ship. They only take items that were thrown from the ship on its way down. And I'm like, okay, that's not a bad idea because that's still showing respect to the people who were on board the ship. And you also have to remember that there's a lot of people today that want to remember the Titanic and see things from it. So I'm a little bit, it depends on the item. It depends on the artifacts. It depends on like what they do with the item. So like if there's pieces of the Titanic that are up for public sale, like the big piece of steel that or the hull that they recovered. Yeah,
Yeah.
like they brought that up, and there's big pieces of it in museums, and there's a piece of it in L.A. if you can believe, or not L.A. Las Vegas.
Uh,
In the middle of the desert, there's a piece of it. I saw a piece of it in Orlando, and then they took small pieces of that and broke it up and sold it in a bunch of stuff. So like you can own a piece of the Titanic. I have a piece here in my house. Like I have it in my pen. I have it in a pen. But
oh
now,
yeah, yeah, because you said it on one of your videos. You had like the little bit of the piece of the wreck in the pen, but then also you had other artifacts that were related to the Titanic and the Olympic class liners as well, which I found so fascinating.
oh, thank you. And yeah, like I have a piece of the decking from Olympic. I have a panel from the second class lounge. I have that stuff. But here's ultimately, if stuff is brought up and then it's kind of up for public sale and everything like that, and there's a general people can get them like Titanic coal or stuff like that. I'm a little bit more loose on it because the majority or the big part of those artifacts you can see. So like the big piece and all that, like what I have is literally like probably not even a centimeter. It's just a little tiny little speck of what it is. So I know they just slid it off and put it in a pen. But so that stuff I'm a little bit okay with. But like when you go down to the ship and then you bring up something like that's a one of a kind piece and then it goes up for public auction and then somebody pays $10 million or pounds or whatever for it, and you never see it again. You see like something that really has historical significance to the wreck. I'm a little bit I don't like that too much. But at the same time, that money can go to the Titanic Historical Society, who can use that to help fund further research. So at the same time, it's a little bit hitter. You see what I'm saying? It's like that money can go to help tell the story of the Titanic, but at the same time, that person's taking that item and we're never going to see it.
Oh yeah,
So,
especially with private collectors as well, really. And I mean, Ballard, he addressed the issue point in one documentary, and I always find his opinions very fascinating on this, really,
oh
because
yeah,
he disagrees with it completely.
right. And here's the ultimate thing. Like, we can use 9/11 as an example. Like I like visiting New York City. I go there a couple of times a year sometimes. And like I went to the 9/11 memorial. They built the big museum underneath where the twin towers were. And when I was there and I saw like the artifacts linked to the 9/11 thing, it made it feel more real. Like, instead of it just being something that I was 10 when 9/11 happened, so I don't remember it at all. Like, I was too young and I wasn't in New York. But it was just like when I was there and I was seeing these items and artifacts, and then I'm like, this is where it happened. I'm like if I was standing here 20 years ago, I I probably wouldn't be here talking to you. You know what I mean? It's just, and I think Titanic, when you see objects from it, and if it's in a museum or something, it makes the event seem more real, you know? And a lot of people were making a big deal about them going in and recovering the radio. Did you hear about that? The Titanic's
Yes,
radio.
yes, that was recent, actually, and I know the UK government got involved in this as well with the Titanic Society, and like I said earlier, they had a bit of a ding dong with that, and at one point it was taken to court.
I didn't know that. I did not know
Oh,
that.
oh yeah, yeah. The Daily
Right.
Telegraph, the newspaper where I am, then mentioned it completely. But in the end, it was decided not to. But it was mainly because of COVID.
Right. Well, and this article came out and said they're going to cut a hole in the Titanic, take the radio out. I'm like, okay, so the Titanic is in a rapid state of decay. And I used to be very much against them going inside the ship and taking things out because, I pay respect. As the Titanic's a great site and it should be treated as such. But we are losing the Titanic. And during one of the last dives, they found the captain's cabin had completely collapsed. You could barely see the bathtub. Like the captain's bathtub is like a popular thing for Titanic divers to see. So we are losing the ship. And if we don't save some things from within the ship before it's gone, then that story's going to be gone. And the whole thing about the radio, the Marconi's cabin was right there with the officers' quarters, right up there at the front of the ship, right behind the first funnel. And the roof of that room is caving in. So it would be nothing for them to get in there, get the radio, if it's still there. I don't know how much would be left at this point, but still. All they have to do is just maybe do a little cut and get that roof out of the way, go in and get it. Because, that roof is caving in anyway. So it would have been very small, very non-intrusive, and I don't think it would have really done that much to the wreck since that roof is caving in anyway. So that's my thing on it. We're losing the ship, and I'm a little bit more open to them within reason. I don't want them to go in and wreck the ship to get an item out. You know what I mean? But if they treat it with respect and stuff and they want to recover a few things here and there, at this point, it doesn't really, as long as they treat it with respect, I think it'd be good to preserve the Titanic for future generations.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then also you just got to really think about who is going to own the most artifacts. And from what I understand, I've never been to any of the Titanic museums ever, but my main goal is to go to the Belfast one. But
Mm.
I think from what I understand, Las Vegas owns more of the artifacts from the wreck than any other Titanic themed museum in the world.
I did not know that. I did not know
Mm.
that.
But I could be wrong, really. But it's just something that came across my mind, really. So when you think about the Marconi room, oh, I can't pronounce it. The Marconi room. I'll go
I
with
know what you mean. I
that.
know what you mean. I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
And it's going to be interesting to think about if it's going to be taken from the wreck, who's going to own it? Who is going to preserve it? And this is the thing that's going to be a hotly debated question. And because you've got to really see how much history if it's there, because if someone thinks, oh, it should be stuck in the Titanic Museum in Belfast, it makes sense because I think the guy who invented the wireless operators, not on the Titanic, but any other wireless operators himself, he lived in Scotland, from what I understand. Again, I could be wrong. And they just think, since the guy over there is from the UK, it should be in the UK. Or if not, then anywhere
Uh,
else. And there's always going to be like loads of arguments, really.
yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think that they should share it. Like if they bring up something of that historical significance, I don't think that that should be something that any one person owns. I think it should be passed around so that everybody can see it. Like, did you know that they found the violin that played "Near My God to Thee"?
Yes, I have heard the story of it.
And the way I think it does belong to a private family, but it gets passed around. So it's like people can see it. Because I do believe it's sold for auction. But still, it's like I know it was at the museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee a while back. So it's like it's passed around and that's even something like the violin is something that I don't really, even though it's owned by a private individual, it doesn't really bug me too much because they didn't go down with the ship. They found it in Wallace Hartley's wife's attic. It was just up there sitting for 100 years. So it's like it was passed, but still, whoever owns it now, because it did sell for auction, they're keeping the history alive. You see what I'm saying?
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's as long I think there's a way to do it. I don't like the idea of priceless artifacts going off to people who will just hoard them and never show them to people. You know what I mean? Like if they want to sell Titanic coal or a little piece of steel or something and the public can buy it, I'm not as much against that as people taking something that can't be seen. You see what I'm saying? Like plates or items from the ship or things that have real historical significance. You see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, this is going to be another example that I thought about because while you were saying that, Sam, I went to like a short event in London a few years ago with my dad, and when there was a room about the Titanic wreck itself, I can remember, and this was pre-COVID, that most of, I think the big piece was there at the time in London, and there
Okay.
was a little other bit of the wreck which you can touch, which I didn't really know about, but they were trying to encourage guests to touch to see what it felt like. And I touched it about 5 times, and each time I did, my spine shivered completely,
Right.
and my tummy, oh, it felt like I wanted to be sick. Like, it's very creepy, but it made me want to be sick. And I really didn't know why at the time because I was about 14, 15. But
Okay.
looking back on it now, I realize really that since it was part of a gravesite, it really shouldn't really be touched or be displayed to the public. And that really got me thinking in recent times as well.
But thinking of it like that, though, is like, what about all the stuff from 9/11? You know what I mean? Like, because 9/11 was worse than Titanic, in terms of loss of life, And as far as the whole actually touching a piece of the ship thing, that's kind of I kind of see where you're like, yeah, like I don't really like that. I don't like that they're letting people touch this one little thing. But at the same time, it's like I said earlier, if you can actually see it and you can actually, like, this is part of the Titanic. Like, I don't know if you saw my video, but I went to a museum in Orlando, Florida, and they have one of the telegraphs, like the engine room, like the telegraphs, like on the bridge where Murdoch grabbed it. When I saw that, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what Murdoch grabbed when he saw the like that just it sends shivers down my spine. Because when I see these artifacts and these objects, they bring the Titanic to life. It's not something in a book. It's not something in a movie. It's real. It's real. It's a real thing. So I'm all for preserving the memory of it and treating the wreck with respect and preserving artifacts, and maybe touching the hull is a little much. It's just like that Australian billionaire who's wanting to rebuild the Titanic. I'm like, that's not Titanic's a dinghy by modern day ship standards. There's no reason to do that. And it's not teaching us anything. And I think that in a way can be seen as disrespectful, because he's trying to capitalize on the Titanic name. And I'm not really for that. It's not going to be the Titanic. You can't rebuild the Titanic under normal law and it'd be legal to sail it. It just looks like it. It's a cruise ship, but it looks like the Titanic. I think there is a way to do it and still be respectful, because kids 100 years from now, I'm sure the wreck will be mostly gone, or not much of it'll be there by then. But by seeing these artifacts, it brings it to life again, because most people aren't going to be able to go dive Titanic. You know what I mean? So if we don't if we don't do something to preserve some stuff from it, then that history will be lost. I think it keeps the memory of everybody who was on her alive.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And then we're going to be moving on to the one final question because I know that talking about the Titanic's legacy, even though it's 110 years since the disaster, or which is coming up to the disaster, oh, this is going to be a really hard one because,
Okay.
like so many Titanic enthusiasts, they always question about the Titanic's legacy when you think about it, if you think about the legacy from a century from now, if it's the 210th year of the disaster, let's say for example, would the Titanic be forgotten still, or would it still play in a key parts in the history? So, say for example, if I don't know how to describe this. If it would still be remembered and if there were still like museums that are still going to be there that played an important part of the construction of the ship and the disaster, or would it be gone because
I
there
got you.
might be
I
some
got you.
plans for that?
I got you. Compare the Titanic to other shipwrecks. Okay, like think about compare the Titanic to the Lusitania. You know, the Lusitania was a horrible disaster and it sank. But what's different about the Lusitania and the Titanic? It sunk in 18 minutes, and the Lusitania was a terrible tragedy. So many people died. But the Lusitania, the torpedo hit it, and then it more or less just dropped like a rock. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't. And with the Titanic, so it. I'm trying to think of the right words to describe it, but it's what I think makes the Titanic story so fascinating is how unique it is, because you have this giant ship with all the people from all corners of society. You know, you have the wealthy elite to the immigrants just trying to make a new life for themselves. You know what I mean? And it's then you have this thing happen, and this ship sinks so slowly that there's time for all of this stuff to happen. And then you've got your heroes, you've got your villains, like the people who just wanted to save themselves. You've got the men in the engine room who knew they weren't going to get out of there, but they stayed just to keep the lights going, to keep the power for the telegraph going. You've got Frederick Barrett, you know, the boiler room guy, like the fireman, who, like, I mean, seriously, everything that he went through that night, oh my gosh. Like, I mean, he dodged death so many times that night. Mm. And the band playing Near My God to Thee right there at the end, and the captain. There's just so much about Titanic that shows the best and the worst of humanity. You know what I mean? And like, what would you do if you were there that night? You know, how would you behave? How would you act? And I think that story, the story of the people, that's it. That's it with Titanic. You know, if Titanic had hit an iceberg and then it just sank in 15 minutes, I don't think she'd be anywhere near as famous. She'd be another ship that went down very fast. But, and it'd be made voyage and everything, so it'd still be known, but it wouldn't be, it's the story of the people, you know, and what they did and what they experienced. And the Titanic didn't capsize. That's another big thing. Ships capsize all the time, you know, and it had some degrees of lift here and there, but I think Titanic will always be remembered because it makes you think about what would you do. And you look at those, like I look at those people on the Titanic and I'm like, you know, I would be right there with those men. You know, if I'm watching my wife and child leaving the Titanic, I would be right there standing with those men, just waiting and let them go. And then I'd be like, okay, they're off. Okay, how am I going to save myself? And then I'd start thinking, you know what I mean? I'd be like, okay, what can I do now? You know what I mean? Like I'd get them off, make sure my duty was done. And I'd be like, okay, how can I survive? You know what I mean? Like I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna get a door, or I'm gonna go do this or do that, you know. And people also like to think about Charles Yalkin as well, the guy who didn't think he was gonna survive and got himself so wasted that
no, that was the most brilliant story I've ever heard, really.
yeah. So, but you see what I'm not saying I would do that, but I'm just saying, you see what I'm saying? People like think, what would they do? And I think it shows the best and worst of humanity. And I don't think the story of the Titanic will ever go away completely. I think it may get distorted over time, but you know what I mean? Like Pompeii, you know, that was 2,000 years ago, but we still know about it. We still know a volcano erupted and buried the city. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think Titanic's legacy will always live on.
Oh yeah, I definitely 100% agree, especially with all the heroes as well. I mean, I always believe that the true heroes of the story were the wireless operators. I think really, and it actually showed in the example of Thomas Linsky's film The Last Signals, which
Yeah,
I
great.
would highly recommend watching. By the way, it's such a good short film, and it's definitely one of those important things that it will always live on, and it will always have a special place in our hearts, really. If you are a survivor of the disaster, or you're a relative to a Titanic survivor, or if you have a piece of history with the wreck, or if you were like looking at an artifact, it's always going to be very special no matter what. And I think we're going to actually leave it here. So Sam, thank you so much for coming on today. It was really great chatting to you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. And also, don't forget, if you want to look at Sam's channel, type on YouTube Historic Travels, and you can find his YouTube channel from there. But then also to check out, if you are interested in the Titanic, then make sure to look out for your local historical societies, and there are a few books to it as well. And I could go on about it forever, but I know there's going to be lots of stuff out there. But the guys, thank you so much for coming on to watch and listen today. And I will keep you informed with the documentary, which will be coming up at a later date. But hopefully you enjoyed this little sneak preview. And yeah, I hope you have such a wonderful day. And yeah, so until then, guys, I will catch you very, very soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye.
Bye.